Hello everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Davide Benvegnu, and I'm a DevOps architect on the Azure DevOps Customer Advisory Team, also known as CAT. Today, we're going to explore how you can debug and interact with your production application using the Azure technologies. Interacting with production application is historically a fairly complex thing to do, but we're about to see today that it's very, very easy in Azure. Let's jump into the presentation. All right, these are my references. So if you want to reach out to me after the presentation, feel free to do so using the means below. Let's take a step back and see why it is kind of difficult to interact with production applications. First of all, because most of the time you have problems and frustration in getting exceptions, login data because of lockdown environments and something like that. Or different data, or even scale, like if you have some load balancers or anything like that that are not necessarily present in your development environment, especially if you're doing it locally. And third, because you need to have tools that you need to acquire and configure, and you need to buy licenses, and especially the configuration for those may not be very straightforward. So in general, working with production application is fairly difficult. Let's see today how we can overcome that. First of all, we will take a look at Azure Monitor and how it is a single solution for monitoring in Azure. Then we will take a look at application insights and see how we can look into our production application directly without touching them. And then we take a step forward and we look at Azure Log Analytics and how we can query logs and traces. And finally, we can see how to actually debug this application directly in production. Let's talk about Azure Monitor. What is Azure Monitor? Well, Azure Monitor is the monitoring solution in Azure, and it gives you full observability for everything in Azure, whether it's infrastructure, applications, networking, and so on and so forth. It is basically a unified monitoring store for metrics and log, and even third-party telemetry or even custom telemetry. It allows you to have data-driven insights, because all the metrics and monitorings that are ingested can be actually analyzed via machine learning capabilities that are built into the system. And last but not least, you can have workflow integration with all your most popular tools, whether are DevOps tools, issue management, SIEM, or ITSM tools. So it's not only very powerful tools for ingesting metrics and logs in Azure, but can be used for proactively understand and react to your application and infrastructure metrics, and can be integrated easily with other tools. And the tools that can send data to Azure Monitor, and in general, all the sources for metrics and logs are in this slide. And as you can see, we go from the very bottom, talking about Azure tenants. So we ingest data from Azure Active Directory, all the way up to your application, going through all that is in the middle. Like we ingest data from Azure subscriptions in terms of resource manager activities, health, security center, which is very important. We ingest data and we can have log and metrics from Azure resources, YAS like virtual machines, or PAS like storage accounts, app service, and even networking stuff like network security group. We, of course, support both Linux and Windows for syslogs and performance counters. And again, as I said before, we go all the way up to your application in which we can ingest user telemetry and application logs. So we cover basically the full spectrum from the very foundational pieces like AAD and the subscriptions all the way up to applications. This is a view. I'm not going in deep in this one, but this allow you to understand better, what are the sources we have, what are we ingesting, and what we can provide as part of that ingestion. Whether you need for insights, whether you want dashboards and Power BI, or alerts, or even auto scale. There are some features in Azure Monitor that allow you to, for example, scale some VMs or other services or app service, for example, based on metrics that are ingested. And when you're going to wire it all up, you will see that, if you put all the logs and metrics that are emitted by Azure directly, plus the diagnostic extension that you can install on VMs and other services, plus the agents, again, for both Windows and Linux, and they are actually workload agnostic, so you can run them no matter what you're running in Azure. And when you put it together, also the application insight, which is basically an SDK that you can install in your application. And we support basically a lot of different languages and framework. But even if your language or framework is not supported directly by the SDK, you can still use the APIs. So if you put all this together, you'll see that you can really monitor basically everything and anything you have in Azure. All right, so let's take a look at Azure Monitor for our example application. And let me take a step back first. So let's start looking at the application. This is the Tailwind Traders application that you may have seen already in some other session, but it's basically an e-commerce application that allows us to shop for our home. But this particular version of the application has some problems. You can see this. If I refresh it here, I have some problem coming up. If I try to add something to the cart, I have some errors. And if I try to navigate to my shopping cart, you'll see I have a bunch of exceptions coming up. So again, same application, but probably we have some problems in here and we want to investigate. So let's go back to Azure Portal and let's go into our app service where our application is currently running. And as you can see, just out of the box here, I have some information that I can see. I can see that there has been some error in the time of any HTTP 500 or in the 500 range in the last couple of hours. And I can correlate that with some data in and data out and my request and response time. So this is something that comes from Azure Monitor, and I have it available directly into my app service portal. Another cool thing that I can do here is if I go down here into the logs, I can see some logs. And if I go to the app service logs, I can make sure that the application logging is enabled. When I have that, if I go to the log stream, I can see in real time my application producing logs. So for example, if I go here and I click on Home Appliances, I'll see here all the information about my request. And even more interesting, when I try to add to cart, which generate the exception, I can see here the exception that are generated and the whole message and the kind of error and so on and so forth. So again, I think this is very interesting. It's actually available out of the box, just as I mentioned before, just enabling this application logging here and the web server logging, and you can even set some quota here. So this is very powerful. It's not the most powerful tool so far. We will see in the other demos other even more powerful tools, but for beginning understanding how your application is behaving and how is it performing, this is a pretty cool part. And this is part of Azure Monitor. This comes for free from Azure Monitor, and actually Application Insights is part of Azure Monitor. So let's go back to the presentation and talk a little bit more about application insights. What is application insights? Well, application insights is as the name say, the extension, if you will, or the part of Azure Monitor that takes care of your applications. As we've seen before, Azure Monitor can span across multiple domains from AAD, infrastructure, etc. Application Insights is the part of Azure Monitor that allows you to ingest metrics and logs from directly your application, from within your application. The dashboard you see on screen is a dashboard that is being generated with the data from Application Insights. And as such, is fully customizable. So you can create your own dashboards. Very often I see clients creating these kind of dashboards and projecting them in big screens inside the NOC or inside the support center they may have, or data centers and so on and so forth, so they can understand how their application behave and how their system behave. And these give you the visibility at the kind of a big picture. But then, of course, Application Insight can do much more because it can give you insights inside every single problem or every single behavior that you experience in your application, and allows you to do some optimization. Whether it's automated, we have a component in Application Insight that gives advice directly out of the box, or you can use the data and the telemetry to optimize to optimize your application, because you can, if you measure something, you can learn from it, right? And the way this process works is like this one. So the telemetry is collected from each tier, whether it's a mobile application, whether it's a server, whether it's a web application, and so on and so forth. And we allow also the collection of client data. So for example, for a web application, we can have data collected directly from within the browser. Then the telemetry is actually sent to Application Insight service in Azure, where it's processed and stored and is decoupled and deduplicated, etc. And we store it, and you can actually change the retention period for that as you please. And with that data, then we can generate dashboards, we can generate charts, we can generate insights, and so on and so forth. And you can also automatically analyze usage patterns. So there's something called intelligent insights inside Application Insights, which allows you to get some kind of advice from for the behavior and the usage patterns that we detect in your application. These are just some of the examples of what we can do in Application Insights. Again, this is out of the box. You can have this performance monitoring directly with big picture, but down to the single request. And we can have log search and log analytics embedded in that. And one of my favorite feature is the application map. I'll have a demo about this later. But basically, you can kind of decompose your application and take a look at all the components and dependencies in there and check the performance and eventually the exceptions, if any. And especially if you're doing microservices, this is really important. One of my first question about microservices is, how you're going to monitor the end-to-end transaction when it actually touches multiple services. Well, with Application Insights, you can do it basically with no cost in terms of work, and it's basically out of the box, because you can correlate the traces across different servers and across different services with just few clicks. But yeah, let's take a look at Application Insights. Let's go back to our Azure portal, and here you can see that if I go back, I have Application Insights. And we have a similar dashboard of the one we had in the app service. But one big change here is that we can customize the data range. So for example, I can go back to 12 hours and see the failed request, see the server response time, the total number of requests, and so on and so forth. And also the availability. If for any reason your application is not available, this is recorded here. and will be possible to see that. And by default here, I can go back to 30 days. Now, my application is not being deployed for that long, so I will not have data for less than few days. But for a proper production application, you can go back 30 days and see the behavior of your application. As I was saying before, one of my favorite components of Application Insight is the application map. And here you have it. So in here, you can see, the number of requests, the number of instances of your service. In this case, I only have one instance here, which is the one-app service I'm running into, and the dependency. So my application here needs to connect to MongoDB, and it's actually a Cosmos DB with the MongoDB APIs, and to a SQL Azure here. And immediately you can see that there are some failures. About 26% of all the incoming requests experience some failure. And if you look at here, you will see that about 25% of the requests to MongoDB experience failure, and about 32% to the SQL DB experience some failure. So at a very, in a very immediate way, you can see that something wrong going on, even if you haven't tried the application yet. Another thing you can see here, for example, if I go to the SQL, you can see that I can go and try. In this case, I don't have performance problem. I think that a request of 2.8 milliseconds is pretty good. But let's suppose we have some performance problem, and I can go here and click Investigate Performance. So I can actually go and see how my SQL or any other dependency is behaving. And again, in this case, I only have like 2.83 milliseconds, so less than 3 milliseconds. So I think it's pretty good. But then again, you can go and check in average, you can go and check in the percentiles, and you can customize your range and so on and so forth. So you can see which operation took how much time and how this is impacting. Again, now I can see, for example, that in the 99 percentile, I'm about 66 milliseconds. So it's higher than the average. And I've seen that 42 operations are actually affected by this. And if I want to, I can go here and drill into the details of that operation. Another thing that I really like about Application Insights is the live metrics. And this is super powerful because you can see in real time what your application is doing and how your application is performing. Now, let's give some seconds to the charts to show up. You can see I'm consuming about 400 meg of RAM down here. The CPU is basically idle. So let's go here and start navigating our website. Let's try to go here and add to the cart something. And this will generate probably some exception. All right. So if we go back here, we see that in real time, the system got not only the CPU utilization and some other metrics, but all the information about incoming request, outgoing request, if there is any dependency call failure, and request failure, so on and so forth. So, and this works with any application that is deployed in anywhere, whether it's AKS, whether it's app service, like in this case, even if it's VM, and can give you an immediate feeling of what's going on in your production environment. And we can also go drill into the exception here, but I'll do that in a subsequent demo later. So I think, again, it's a great tool, and you can also, of course, stop it if you want to investigate better. You can change the time frame, and you can go and open these in Log Analytics to go deeper into the metrics. Last thing I want to show you here is the performance here. And again, another chart, but this time goes by all the operations. So you can go and check here the performances of your application by operations. So like, for example, you can see that this is the slowest operation so far, and I can click into it and see what's going on. I can see that how the dependency were going into this operation, and so on and so forth. So again, a really great tool. And the best part of this is that I didn't have to collect any log from anywhere manually. I didn't have to access any production system, or I didn't have to have any special permission, apart, of course, from the RBAC permissions in Application Insights. One thing I didn't mention is that, of course, all of this is and can and should be restricted via RBAC, so via resource role-based access control. And this allows administrator and developers to have a fine tune on permissioning on these parts. All right, so this was Application Insights. Let's talk about now Log Analytics. Log Analytics is, as the name say, the part of Azure Monitor, which allows you to do analytics in logs and metrics. Again, this is governed by RBAC, so role-based access control. So again, you can fine-tune the permissions for your users accessing Log Analytics and what they can see. And Log Analytics used to be part of the OMS suite before, a couple of years ago, and now it's a first-part citizen of Azure Monitor, so it's completely in Azure Portal. You don't need to change Portal anymore. And you can see logs, you can generate charts, you can do statistics, and you can go in depth into root cause analysis and thread analysis and so on and so forth. And as for Application Insights, we have some AI behind the scenes, so you can utilize machine learning algorithms for automatically do anomaly detections or clustering of your data and so on and so forth. And as I was saying, you can go and dig deeper into your data until reaching, as you can see here in the picture, the single line of your logs. But it's better to see this in action. So let's go back to our application. And since we want to look at the application logs, we can actually use the logs here into Application Insights. Log Analytics is not only in Application Insights. For example, if you have a VM and you want to see the logs from the infrastructure side, you can see that in the Logs tab in your VM. But for today's demo, let's focus on the application logs. So I'm again into Application Insights. I can go into Logs here. And you can see here I have some data already available. But if I go into Queries, and I can always search for new queries, or I can go here in the archive. In my case, I already set as favorites 4 queries that I want to show you. The first one is the request rate, and together with the failures. So this is a very simple result, and just give you the result code of the exception and how many requests generated that exception. As you can see here in the query window, the language that we use for querying the log is really, really simple. It's somehow similar to SQL, if you will, and it's really, really readable. So I'm just getting the request, and I'm applying some filters. So I want to see where the success of the request is false, and I'm summarizing them by sum of counts, basically, and group by result code. So very, very straightforward. I don't have a lot of other exception here apart for the result code 500. But again, with the click of a button, I'm able to generate a chart of that. And if I would have other results code here, I can see that in a very visual way. So second query I want to show you is a little bit more insightful. So I'm not just seeing the number of exceptions, but I'm seeing actually the exceptions. So already, just like here, I can see that basically all my exceptions are generated somehow from the MongoDB driver. And this is the shopping cart, which we knew it was folding, whether it's a get async or it's put async. So something wrong in the cart. And I can see, again, the operation, what actually failed, how long the request was, and so on and so forth. So again, and of course, all of these are out-of-the-box queries. I didn't have to write a single line of code in here, but I can always check this and customize those queries. Like, for example, I want to see the one which are succeeding, and there we go. So very, very easy. Next one I want to show you is the operation performance. Again, this is not something related to exceptions, but it allows you to have for each operation, for each basically request, how many requests, the average duration, and so on and so forth. And one thing I want to notice is that even though this website is not in production, I have a consistent number of requests in here. And if you look at here, this took only 0.1 seconds to execute. And I've been working in log analytics workspace where there were like millions and millions of records. And for whatever query I was writing, the response time was always in the seconds range. And this is what makes log analytics so powerful, because it's super optimized for logs and metrics. So you can write your queries and be sure that you will have the results in seconds. Last but not least, let me delete this. I want to show you the response time trend. As you can see here, we can also specify that we want the render as a time chart, which means that the default view will not be on the result page, but will go directly on the chart, as you can see. All the other queries were showing on this page, but this one, since we specify directly here, goes directly to the chart. And this allow me to show also that, of course, you can change the kind of chart you want. Maybe you want this kind of chart, and allows you to change the data you want to see here. You want to see maybe the maximum instead of the average. You can change it. And again, look at the response time. It's super, super, super fast. Okay, that I only have 73 records here, but if let's remove the timestamp. So let's get all the data, and as you can see, it's super fast anyway. I just basically didn't change anything. Let's use columns, for example, and let's take the maximum, and so on and so forth. So you can really play with this, and at any point in time, you can export these charts into your dashboard, as I showed you before. So again, a powerful tool. And if you haven't used it if you haven't used it yet, just feel free to go and check. This is really a door that opens into your application and infrastructure. And again, we didn't have to collect this data manually in any way. We just installed the application insight module, and we get that out of the box without customizing anything. So now we know that our application is behaving okay, but it's having some exception. And we know that the exception is probably into some MongoDB related operation. But what if I want to go even deeper and see what's actually happening at my application? And this is where the snapshot debugging is coming into the picture. So snapshot debugging is actually a very powerful feature that allows you to debug your application in production. And it's designed to support distributed applications. So even if you use microservices, you don't have to worry about that. And as with our Azure services, it supports, of course, role-based access control, or BAC. So you don't have to worry about this as well. You can assign the permission for your snapshot debugging only to people you want to. So if you're debugging locally, of course, everything is simple, because there's typically just one instance of the app running at a single server. So no, not a big deal. However, how do you do that in Azure? Because the cloud actually complicates things, especially for production environments, because you probably have multiple users, each one accessing your distributed application with instances spanning multiple servers. So how do you debug a specific end-to-end experience? Well, again, this is the job of snapshot debugging. And whenever you have the active, and if you have application insights, basically it's already active. It allows you to identify for a specific transaction or a specific request the server that has been hit. So that allows you already to trim down the number of clients. And on the other side, since we do also client-side monitoring, allows you to identify the single client or the single application instance that has been hit for that transaction. And when you have that, you basically are in the same kind of experience of when you debug locally, because you have one-to-one relationship about that. And this is because snapshot debugging captures the unique call stack for a specific session. So you can debug without having to understand which client or server was part of the end-to-end flow that resulted in that exception. So let's take a look at these. Again, we start in the application insights, but this time we go to the failure tab here. And as you can see, we have some failures. So let's, for example, take one of these 500, and you have here this button that allows you to drill into one of the operations. So what this does is giving me a list of some of the operation I can drill into. And as we know already, it's all related to the shopping cart. And when I click in that, I have the full stack trace of my exception. And I see all the requests that have been made for that particular transaction. And I see also the one that have been successful, but I see also the one, of course, that haven't been successful. Now, if you see here, this is the actual exception. So if I click on that, I can actually have in here, let me make it bigger so it's easier to read, this open debug snapshot. And actually, if you see here, I can directly, if I have Azure DevOps connected, I can also create a work item like a bug or something into my Azure DevOps for managing this. But let's go back to our debug snapshot. So let's click on these. Oh, and by the way, before clicking, you can see here that I already have the call stack. So I know exactly where the application had the exception, but I want to know even more. So again, let's go here and open the debug snapshot. And this, what this is doing is connecting to the snapshot debugging engine and get the data from that specific transaction and preparing it in this format. So I have here the whole call stack. But what's really cool is that in here, I have all the variables and all basically the arguments and the variables and the environment variables that were valued during that particular transaction with the value that they had in that transaction. And since I'm running into this in this case is a ASP.NET application, and .NET is an intermediate language, which means that we actually can decompile it, I can see the actual code that is being hit by this transaction. And this is pretty important because if this exception happened before you push the new version of the code, for example, the version of the code you have will be different from the one that generated the exception. So in here, you can see exactly how your code was when the exception was generated. And if you have Visual Studio Enterprise, you can actually use this to download it and open it in your Visual Studio Enterprise. So again, pretty nice example. You see you have the direct session file here that you can actually download, and it's a pretty big one, of course, because there's a lot of logging, a lot of components in there. But I can always open it and see it in Visual Studio, and I have more or less the same information that I have in the web-based experience, but with a very big difference. So if you see here on the right, I have the way to debug directly in my Visual Studio this transaction. And if I click on it, you'll see in a second that I have the actual exception coming up in a pure Visual Studio experience. And so I can always go here and see the details about that exception. Pretty cool, right? All right, this brings me to the end of the session. So we've seen that with Azure Monitor, we can actually, monitor everything about production. We've seen application insights, which allows you to see inside your applications in production without touching, any environment and any log. We have log analytics that allowed us to generate analytics and charts and to log and to go deeper in our logs. And finally, we've seen snapshot debugging, which allows us not only to see the actual code and the actual values of the variables in production when the exception happened, but with Visual Studio Enterprise, you can also debug directly locally that exception. I hope you enjoyed this session. I think it's pretty important, having a way to interact with your production applications. And the combination of Azure Monitor, application insights, and log analytics, and snapshot debugging, it's making that really, really easy, really simple. As long as you have the specific permission with role-based access control, you can really go in depth into your application behaviors, metrics, and logs. Thank you very much for joining me today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.